Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. An amazing middleweight matchup has been announced. Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa, February 12th at UFC 284 in Perth, Australia. And I wanted to do a video giving my reaction as well as an early prediction for this amazing middleweight matchup. And also, when I first saw this fight news, I thought this was kind of a hint about who Khamzat Chimaev may fight next, because a lot of people speculated we would see Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa at middleweight next. Obviously, now that's confirmed that that fight is not happening, and a lot of people were looking forward to that fight, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is an amazing matchup. This makes perfect sense. This fight was actually booked for April of 2021. Paulo Costa pulled out for whatever reason. I can't remember. Kelvin Gastelum stepped in. Whittaker beat Gastelum. And we never got to see this fight. And this is a matchup that I've been wanting to see for a long time. I believe this is going to be the co-main event of UFC 284. I'm not sure if that's 100% confirmed yet, but I'm pretty sure it will be. And this is just a spectacular matchup, and it has title implications. We have Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira at UFC 281 in a couple weeks. Depending on how that fight goes, you know, it makes a lot more riding on this fight, because if Adesanya loses his belt, depending if the UFC runs it back in an immediate rematch, depending on how it ends, I think next in line is probably going to be Robert Whittaker or Paulo Costa, whoever wins this fight at UFC 284. So this is a very, very important fight. And even if Israel Adesanya is able to hold on to his belt, you look at the division right now, I mean, the middleweight division is pretty much cleaned out. And, you know, Adesanya doesn't have a lot of options right now. You know, maybe Sean Strickland if he beats Jared Cannonier in December, but who knows how that's going to play out. And then, you know, I know Robert Whittaker already has 2 fights against Israel Adesanya, and he's lost both of them. But if anyone could earn a third shot at a title against a champion he's already lost to twice, it would be Robert Whittaker. You look back when he lost at UFC 243 October of 2019. A lot of champions would have cried and said, I want an immediate rematch, and this was a fluke knockout, and blah, 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 blah. Robert Whittaker went out there and beat Darren Till, who I believe was ranked in the top 10 at the time. Then after he beats up Darren Till, and it's pretty decisive victory, he goes out there and fights top-ranked Jared Cannonier. Goes out there and beats Jared Cannonier. Is that enough for Robert Whittaker? No. Then he goes out there and beats Kelvin Gastelum to earn himself a rematch with Israel Adesanya at UFC 271 February of this year. And this fight was very competitive. He got knocked out in the first fight. This second fight with Israel Adesanya was razor close. It was very competitive. Israel Adesanya edged him out, won via decision. But this is a fight, you know, it wasn't particularly super exciting or anything. But it's a fight that you can look back on and say, you know what, maybe, just maybe, Robert Whittaker has what it takes to beat Israel Adesanya. And if he goes out there and he beats Paulo Costa, and let's say he does it in impressive fashion, and let's say Sean Strickland loses, and even if Sean Strickland wins, does he really deserve a shot? It's hard to say. I don't really think so. There's nobody left. There's nobody left. You start looking at guys like Andre Muniz and Nasruddin Imavov, who's fighting Kelvin Gastelum. There's not a lot of options for Israel Adesanya if he's able to defeat Alex Pereira, and that's a huge if. And if Alex Pereira wins, Robert Whittaker, Paulo Costa winners at the top of the list to fight for the belt. And, you know, again, also, if Adesanya is able to hold on to the belt, Paulo Costa, I know he already has a loss to Israel Adesanya. He got finished by Israel Adesanya back at UFC 253 in 2020. And, you know, I know this was a very decisive win for Israel Adesanya. I know it was a very poor performance for Paulo Costa. But again, you look at the division, nobody's left. And Paulo Costa is currently sitting at number 6 in the UFC official rankings. Robert Whittaker is sitting at number 1. If Paulo Costa goes out there and gets a big win over Robert Whittaker, imagine he goes out there and stops Robert Whittaker. It's going to be hard to deny him a second shot at Israel Adesanya. In the first fight, I mean, people were hyped for the first fight. Paulo Costa kind of has that excuse, well, I was drunk and blah, blah, blah. They could really build around the Adesanya versus Costa too. Just the whole entire storyline. And I think people would want to see it. You know, you look at the middleweight division, there's not a lot of matchups against Israel Adesanya that people are dying to see. I think people would be intrigued, and the UFC could sell an Adesanya versus Costa 2 fight, title fight, if he beats Robert Whittaker. But that's a big if, because this is a very tough task for Paulo Costa. Right now, he's only on a one-fight winning streak. He was undefeated. He lost to Israel Adesanya. He got TKO'd. Sat out for literally forever, over a year. Came back against Marvin Vettori. Missed weight. They fought at 205. Loses to Marvin Vettori in an amazing matchup. And then most recently, he beat Luke Rockhold at UFC 278. But Luke Rockhold was retired for literal years, and this was even a competitive fight. A lot of people expected Costa to go out there and chin him in the first round. So Paulo Costa's not in a particularly amazing spot right now just based off his resume. But a win over Robert Whittaker would cure all of that and potentially earn him a title shot. And who wouldn't even, if Alex Pereira refreshes up the middleweight division and has a new champion at the top, people would want to see Pereira versus Costa as well. That'd be a very intriguing matchup. As far as an early prediction for this fight, this is an amazing high-level matchup. But you look at their skills. Paulo Costa is a guy who comes out, looks to pressure, looks to swing, nasty combinations. And I know a lot of people consider him a knockout artist, and he does have 11 wins by knockout out of 14 wins. But he's more of a guy that's like a TKO type guy. He's an accumulation type guy. He's not going out there and knocking guys dead. And he also tends to fade in the later rounds. He started to get tired in the Luke Rockhold fight. That was at elevation, so you could, kind of excuse it away. The Marvin Vettori fight, his cardio looked really good, but he missed weight. That was at 205, so it's really hard to say where his cardio is actually at. And then you go back to the old Romero fight, a 3-round fight where he had a very high pace. He was getting tired in that third round. So it's going to be very interesting to see how his cardio holds up in this fight against a guy in Robert Whittaker, who is one of the most well-rounded fighters in the UFC. He has an amazing skill set. We know his stamina is good. We know his striking is good. We know his ground game and his wrestling is good. There's really no weaknesses in Robert Whittaker's game. It's hard to pick out a weakness. And that's why for me, for an early prediction, I'm probably going to go Robert Whittaker via decision. I don't see Robert Whittaker stopping Paulo Costa. I think it's possible. But I think it's going to be one of those fights where Robert Whittaker just sticks and moves. And I think he's going to be hard to track down. I think that he's going to be using his footwork. He's going to be pumping his jab. He's going to be, throwing oblique kicks. And I think maybe Paulo Costa lands some decent shots. But as the fight goes on, I think that Robert Whittaker is just going to pull out ahead because Whittaker isn't going to slow down. Paulo Costa, we know, will slow down as the fight goes on. And Robert Whittaker has great head kicks. I could even see him catching, Paulo Costa, maybe rocking him a little bit in this fight. But Robert Whittaker, I'm just not picking against him unless it's Israel Adesanya at this point. Robert Whittaker is an elite-level, world-class fighter. There's really no weaknesses in his game. And I just find it hard to believe a Paulo Costa who's having a competitive fight with Luke Rockhold is going to be able to beat Robert Whittaker, who's on the top of his game right now, I believe in the prime of his career. So Robert Whittaker probably going to beat Paulo Costa. Will he get a third shot at Adesanya if he's still the champion? It's kind of unlikely, but at the same time, I talked about it. If anybody can do it, it's him. The only time in recent history, maybe even ever, that we've seen it in the UFC would be Volkanovski versus Holloway. Holloway lost the first 2 fights, and he got a trilogy fight, and he lost the trilogy fight. So if anybody else can do it, it'd probably be Robert Whittaker, especially considering the second fight with Adesanya was razor close. But it all depends what happens at UFC 281 between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira for the middleweight title at Madison Square Garden. Now, as far as Khamzat Chimaev goes, that is, up for debate. What's going to happen with Khamzat Chimaev now? Because a lot of people kept saying that Khamzat Chimaev is going to go up to middleweight and he's going to fight Paulo Costa because they had that little gym altercation, back around UFC 279, and people were saying this is the perfect fight. And then the people who were saying, maybe they didn't want the Paulo Costa fight were saying, well, I want Khamzat Chimaev versus Robert Whittaker. Well, obviously neither one of those matchups is happening now. I've been a believer that I think Khamzat Chimaev will stay at 170. I know he missed weight for UFC 279, but I think the UFC, especially with Khamzat Chimaev's star power, I think he will be able to stay at 170 if he wants to. If he's physically able to, the UFC will allow him to stay there. And I've been of a believer. I think the fight that makes the most sense is Khamzat Chimaev versus Colby Covington. And now this fight announcement makes that a little bit more likely because I'll tell you this right now. Khamzat Chimaev is not going up to middleweight and just fighting some bum, some scrub outside of the rankings. If Khamzat Chimaev goes up there, he's going to fight a big fight that will earn him a #1 contender spot. And those 2 fights where really Paulo Costa and Robert Whittaker, and neither one of those fights is happening now. So I believe he will stay at 170. Is Colby Covington going to take that fight? He's been in witness protection for what seems like 5 years at this point, even though it's been like since March of this year, basically, Colby Covington's been in witness protection. But I think the UFC knows how special that fight is. I think they know how big that buildup would be. And I think the UFC is really going to push to make Colby Covington versus Khamzat Chimaev. But what if that doesn't happen? What would be some other options for Khamzat Chimaev? I'll tell you this. It would not shock me. I'm not predicting this to happen. I don't think this happens. But it would not shock me is if Adesanya hangs onto the belt against Alex Pereira at UFC 281. It would not shock me if the UFC just gives Khamzat Chimaev an immediate title shot at middleweight. Would it not make any sense as far as a meritocracy? It would not make any sense. He has no quality wins at middleweight. But his star power, people want to see him fight, Kamaru Usman or Leon Edwards or Israel Adesanya. Some people are saying he's going to be three-weight champion, which is just flat out delusional. It would not shock me if the UFC said, you know what? Adesanya's cleaned everybody out of the division. He's beat Alex Pereira. There's no one left for him to fight. We're going to give him Khamzat Chimaev. And Adesanya, say what you will about his fighting style. He is a guy that always wants to take the toughest challenges. He does not sit around and say, I'm not fighting this guy. I'm not fighting that guy. He would gladly take a Khamzat Chimaev fight, and he wouldn't say, oh, that guy's got to earn his way up. He fought Yo Romero when Yo Romero was on a losing streak because Paulo Costa was injured and Adesanya wanted to stay active. And I get Adesanya is not in the most exciting fights, but he likes to stay active and he likes to fight who he perceives that the fans believe is the toughest challenge. Adesanya is very tuned in to the fan base, believe it or not. And he knows people are saying Khamzat Chimaev would dethrone you. And there's no doubt in my mind that Adesanya would take that fight. Now, let's say that doesn't happen. I think the next best option would probably be the winner of Bilal Muhammad versus Sean Brady, which happens this Saturday at UFC 280 in Abu Dhabi. I have a full breakdown and prediction for that. I'll link it down in the description if you want to check that out. I think that's a possibility. And it would prove Khamzat could make weight at 170. And then if he were to win that fight, he could fight for the title against the winner of Usman versus Edwards 3, which won't happen until maybe March of 2023. The other option would be, and this would, I know a lot of people would complain about this, myself included, but it wouldn't shock me if the UFC let Khamzat Chimaev wait it out for the winner of Usman versus Edwards, even though his last fight wasn't even at 170 just because of the star power. But I doubt they do that. I really think that's unlikely that they let him do that after missing weight. And also, I don't think, it's not the UFC saying, oh, we don't want to do that because he missed weight. I don't think they would want to have Khamzat Chimaev on the sidelines for that long. Khamzat Chimaev is becoming a star. He's become so popular because of his initial ability to stay super active and fighting, fight after fight after fight and staying super active. So I think they're going to want to book him in a matchup. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be Colby Covington versus Khamzat Chimaev. Maybe at the end of the year, UFC 282. That's where I initially thought it would happen. We'll see. That could be a co-main event for, Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira 2. I know there's some speculation about Stipe Miocic versus John Jones headlining that card. Maybe they throw it on there as a featured fight. Could you imagine a UFC 282 main card with John Jones, Stipe Miocic for the interim heavyweight title as the headliner? Co-main event, Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira for the light heavyweight belt. Featured fight on the main card, Colby Covington versus Khamzat Chimaev. That would be incredible. That would be one of the best cards of the year. And the UFC seems to like to stack these cards towards the end of the year. So I think it's a possibility. We'll just have to wait and see. That's the fight I want to see. That's the fight I think a lot of people want to see. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments about all this. Who do you think's going to win, Robert Whittaker or Paulo Costa at UFC 284? Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.